provide is true and accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. Please state and spell your name and provide your address for the record.
John Hemminger, trustee for the Marge Hemminger Trust. Hemminger. First name John, John. I live in Harlan, Iowa, and the trust is sited in South Dakota.
Can you provide the address, your address, please?
1639 100th Street, Harlan, Iowa, 51537.
Thank you. And the property that we'll be talking about today, is that Crawford County?
Crawford County, Gunnison Township, Section 5.
Thank you. And the KMZ file that we have pulled up on our screens, can you see that? Is that the appropriate property?
Yes, it looks like it.
Okay.
This is my first time on Zoom, so I apologize.
You're doing great. All right. Can you describe the current use of your property and any plans you may have for a different use in the future?
Presently, it's farm ground. It was subject of it was held by my mom and my aunt, who inherited from my grandfather. It was subject of a lawsuit, and the property was split. So now it's dual use. It's cropland on the portions that are farmable, and then the rest is untouched forest reserve under Iowa Code classification. And the highest best use and what we have intended for the last 25, 30 years is to have lots on it, because it rests along, as you can see in your map, Highway 141, which is a solid road that runs east-west across your screen. And we've done the legwork with rural water and with the state highway to plat this out. So we're in the process of platting this property for development.
Can you describe that process and where you are in that process?
The contacts that I've made include rural water, the state highway system, talking to different people who are workers, talking to people that have platted before, and then speaking with our attorney for the trust.
Okay. Have you entered into any agreements for development or use of the land?
No, we're in the process of doing it. This Carbon Summit pipeline has actually expedited the need to get that going. We have had, I would say, moderate to great interest to purchase parcels, but after speaking with the attorney, there are certain, under Iowa statute, there are certain steps you have to go through, and you can only carve out the property so many times. So the reference was to provide us to plat it out at this time. That's the best way to go. So it's a intricate process, and one that we hadn't considered implementing until Carbon Summit came along.
Thank you. Can you provide a general description of the property and any structures? You talked about the use, and we'll dive into that a little bit more, but can you give us a general description of the property?
Well, as you see in the upper right-hand corner, northeast corner of the map, where you have that's farmland right now, but where the trees move from the northwest to the southeast, that's a pond or a stream that runs pretty much continuously. And then as you see the pipeline, after it crosses, and I guess they have to bore through at the gate across 141, because in the northeast corner it elevates to where you would not be, it would be a difficulty right where you have your pointer. So right where you're circling is where they must cross. That's the lowest point where they can drill underneath. At least that's what their representatives represented to me when I met with them. And then you follow the white line south, and at the bottom of the hill where it turns and runs parallel with the fence line, that's where the stream is. And there it is very high elevation. So it's, I can't tell you the number of feet in elevation, but you're not able to, you have to have a 4x4 utility just to make it up that embankment.
So just to clarify, from that southeast corner of the parcel where the pipeline is proposed down to the road is a substantial drop.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then the bottom portion that is crops as of right now, does that hold water throughout the year?
In the northeast corner?
Yes.
It runs.
It runs. Okay.
It doesn't hold water. It runs water throughout the year in most years. Right now we're in a D3 drought, so I can't say that it's running, as I haven't been been in their field since we planted.
And are there any buildings or structures currently on that property that we can't see?
Other than the fence along that divides where the March Hemminger Trust property is and the property that was my aunt's that was recently sold along the southern portion. So if you stop right, if you go up a little bit more, right there, that's the fence line that runs all the way over to the road. Right up a little, stop right there. That's the fence line that runs all the way over to the other side. And the reason we divided the property that way was to make certain that we could put a road around the property. So when it was developed, we would have access. So there's a livestock fence there. And then the tree lines also has another fence to keep the cattle out in the past, because all those trees that you see are part of the forest reserve, and thereby there is no property tax paid on that property, so you can't have livestock on that property either. Other than that, if you, on the upper right-hand corner, the northeast corner, if you follow the line up to the road, you do not see this, even though the trust owns the ground to the center of the state highway, technically the state owns the land on either side for the right-of-way. And to the left, if you go another 3 inches over to the left of the triangle, stop right there. There's a cutout right there where it drops off precipitously from where the road runs, the height of the road, down to where the stream is. There's a cutout there as well. And that structure is not represented in the map very well. You might be able to see a little left of where your arrow is right now. I believe that's where it's cut into where the state owns the land, technically.
Okay.
Or they have to.
Okay, thank you. Other than rural water, is there any other buried infrastructure on the property?
Not at this time that I know of. I checked the legals, and rural water runs on the west side of the parcel.
So other than that northeast corner with the stream that's running, is there any other bodies of water or noteworthy terrain features that you haven't already identified?
Well, if you move the screen to the west, which for me would be left, you can see what I call the fingers. There's 3 fingers stemming out. Looks like little open areas of land that may have one time been livestock kennels years ago for my great-grandfather. But the land is super steep. It's perfect for if you want to put a house and have a deck and look over a nice area. But it is very hilly. And I'm in agreement with one of the earlier persons that testified, Mr. Reinig, that, and I've had this with other trusts in different states that I'm trustee for, where you have subsidence. And that's one of the concerns with this pipeline because of the terrain. And again, that's why I'm pointing out this terrain is very steep.
The timber or forested portion, we have a couple questions here. One, the forestry program you described, can you describe that for us? What does it entail to get in and stay into that program?
It's called Forest Reserve, and I don't know the statutory citation for it, but I do know my grandfather, I believe, did it in 1986. He'd been the county assessor for Crawford County, and it had to be X number of trees per acre, and then those trees, you must maintain those trees. This parcel's actually never been broken, so it's subject to sodbuster, is my understanding from the USDA, and I've requested assistance and a definition or qualification from USDA, FSA, and NRCS as to how sodbuster would apply to this, since this ground has never been broken before.
Can you explain the sodbuster program that you're alluding to here?
Okay, and one last point I want to reemphasize. On the Forest Reserve, there's 0 tax. So no taxes are being paid on that ground as long as it's not put into any productive use whatsoever. So that's a state program under the state of Iowa. All right, sodbuster is, as far as I understand it from my discussions with the county directors, is that it has land that has never been placed into production previously, cannot be placed into production or broken again without having permission from the federal government to do so. So it's an application made to USDA, FSA, and then NRCS has to come out and look at it, and then they tell you you may or may not be able to open this land up if it was prior to some year, if it's ever been used prior to X year that they chose. So let's say 1955. If you can go back and prove that it had been used, then you can put it back into production with their current standards to control erosion or a mitigation of erosion standards, like implementation of terraces or certain types of farming practices to stop the loss of land. And that's why, where I say those fingers are, I believe my great-grandfather and grandfather had animals penned up in those areas previously. So they would be open to sodbuster, but breaking down where that pipeline on the east side runs parallel with the fence line, that area would not be able to be put back into trees. Therefore, it's not eligible for a forest reserve program, which also means that there's property taxes that will accrue into perpetuity. Plus, it may not qualify for any kind of planting. However, in negotiations so far with Carbon Summit, I've had to take two paths. One, as the development of lots, that's what I'll talk about later. And then currently, if they clear all those trees, then is it able to be farmed? And that answer is yet unknown. Does that help?
I think so. So just to clarify, it's your belief that the pipeline jeopardizes both of those programs for you?
Well, yes, the pipeline jeopardizes the development of the property, and that goes to one of the questions that I had for the Iowa Utilities Board regarding the article I read in the Capital Dispatch about a report. They did an article regarding Mississippi and the carbon pipeline that ruptured. You know, people couldn't get away in time because the vehicle stopped running because they didn't have any oxygen to run the vehicles, you know, so that's not good. But supposedly, and I checked with the Iowa Utilities Board, that report regarding it's some kind of deficiency report has been legally, they've gone to court to preclude us from getting our hands on it. So right now, this pipeline jeopardizes the value of this whole property on the side of development, and then on the side of farming this until development can take place. Yeah, I don't know. I asked for certain provisions like a deeper cut, which they said they placed in the easement, and to the best of my ability, I believe they have. But the concern is the subsidence over time. I'm dealing with that in another state, and just like Mr. Reinig, we have to, or before that property can go out and chisel, or even deep plow, or deep disc, you have to call the company, and they have to send somebody out to watch you as you're out there in the field trying to just till the soil. So it's hampered the value of the land. And that's what I'm afraid could happen here.
The forest and timber area that the pipeline is proposed to go through, is that hardwood? What type of trees and foliage are we working with here?
Oh, it's, according to my grandfather, it was all types. I know there's oaks out there, maple. At one point back in the, I'd say early 90s, they went through and harvested timber out of this to take the older, the wood that was less quality. They moved in to remove that, or a portion of that. That's long before my mom had an interest, an actual farming interest, or nor the trust had one. So I can't speak to every type of wood that's out there, but there's supposedly a lot of good hardwood that could be at least saved or repurposed when they yank it out. But it's not something that we're, it's a one-time remuneration. It's not given. You can't, because you can't grow trees after they put the pipeline in, and then growing trees between, because they're doing two different types of easements. They want one easement from the fence line on the east side over as a working easement, and then they want the easement for the pipeline, which is another X number of feet. I do not recall. But that whole stretch of trees that are removed cannot be replanted. I mean, you can't replant X number of feet on either side of the pipeline, which is only prudent. But putting trees between that and the fence line is also not prudent because you can't get it back into the forest reserve. It doesn't have enough acres to requalify, even if you plant the required number of trees per acre. So essentially, from the fence line over to where their easement that they've requested exists, you can't put it back to the way it was. So you have to find an alternative use. And again, we're back to farming and then ultimately development.
Thank you. Are there any easements held by a third party at this time?
I believe I can't move, sorry, I was trying to move the screen over. On the west side, there's the easement with the regional water for Crawford County that runs north-south along Avenue 230 off of Highway 141. Does that help? Then was I clear?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. Any other feature or condition that might not be readily available or apparent and that might affect or be affected by the proposed project?
Can you repeat that again? There's a lot of smaller components to your question.
Yeah, sorry. Any other features on this particular property that we might not be able to see right now? We've talked about a lot of potential features, but you know the property better than anyone. So if there's, a particular feature on the parcel that would be helpful for siting purposes, should that become necessary, we would like to know.
What do you mean by siting? You mean movement of the pipeline, proposed pipeline?
Correct. I mean, that's the purpose of the conversation.
Okay, if you can, I would appreciate it if you would move the show further west. Okay, and there we go. Okay, stop. All right, you see on the left-hand side of the property, the road that goes up the hill? Yeah? Okay, that's actually in Section 6 of Denison Township, just a little squiggly part there. And so those trees are not part of the forest reserve. So there's like an acre or two there in Section 6. However, that's where, on that side where the rural water heads south. So if you go across 141, as it was explained to me, and I would ask you to verify with rural water, on the north side of 141, running east-west, down the road to your right, where that entrance shows up, there's a house with a little pond, another 2, there you go. That's as far as the rural water runs, with, I guess, with a 4-inch main all along there. And so my understanding is that they cannot, the best place for them, if you move it further to the right, to cross 141 is right where it is, because it's the lowest point where they can drill underneath, as it was explained to me, and they avoid the rural water because the water comes from the west and not from the east. So there is no rural water running over where the proposed pipeline is. Also, again, in the upper right-hand corner of the trust property, that's where it's about 20 feet tall, like a little berm. And so they can't go through there either without digging in and cutting everything up. So,
I'm sorry, which property is that?
It's on our property in the upper right-hand corner to the left, right
Okay.
there. There's a 20-foot berm right there. And then on the other side of the fence line, apparently, and this is only hearsay given to me by the representatives of Carbon Summit that somebody was going to build. It was just purchased, and they're going to build a house along there. So they're precluded from moving further east of the property line, because that's where supposedly there used to be a building site there many years ago. And apparently somebody has purchased that to put another building site at that point. So, that goes back to, I don't remember where I read it, where they said that, if eminent domain is taking without just compensation. And we're not disputing the fact that where they have run the line is probably the only place they can run the line. What we have an issue with as a trust is the remuneration is not in line with the value of the property at its highest and best use that we've been planning on for decades. Does that help?
Yes, it is. Can you describe any specific concerns you may have and any recommendation you have for the board to address your concerns?
Well, number one, I don't understand personally the reluctance of Carbon Summit to release whatever that deficiency report is. That I can't remember the individual's name. He was cited in the Capital Dispatch article regarding the evaluation that wasn't done when we talk about the Mississippi incident. They didn't do an evaluation as to how it affects or harms other properties. Should there be a leak or some sort of, nicking the carbon line? And so I believe that should be made public notice. And since they're going to court to withhold that, I believe that there should be a greater amount of time provided for this process to take place. Because if we're not able to fully have the facts, especially in the cause of eminent domain, and I don't particularly think eminent domain is appropriate since this is a private project, and at the same time they're receiving public credits towards their tax structure from the federal government. So why should we as the landholders, and I as a trustee represent the beneficiaries of the trust, why should we have to give up more and not be allowed to effectively have all the information that we need to negotiate an easement, remuneration for an easement across the property? Because we're on both sides. As producers, we understand the need, and at the same time, as landowners, we understand how it affects the trust in diminishing the value of the land. How many people, especially after they've read about the Mississippi incident, would want to buy a lot, and if we were to sell a lot, according to our attorneys, that you would have to make certain that they knew that the pipeline existed near this location. So, as the beneficiaries go, there's two different sides, and they're arguing amongst themselves as to what the value is. So more time is one of the greatest things. Release of the report would be great. Precluding eminent domain, and eminent domain, from my understanding, and please collect, I think this is something that when I've read through the materials hasn't been clear to me, and I guess I would ask for greater clarification from the IUB Utilities Board. Is eminent domain to purchase or eminent domain to procure the easement across the property? In the paperwork that was sent, it kind of scares you. Hey, this is looks like a court case, and we're going to take the land from you. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm still waiting to hear back, from all the minutia. As I watch the sessions, I'm trying to get a greater understanding. So again, time factors into that. The other thing I can say is I asked that the pipe in the easement negotiations, I brought up the fact that in different jurisdictions in the past, they say the pipe is made for one use, and then, well, surprise, surprise, hey, we're changing what we're going to send through the pipe. And they reverse the direction of flow of the pipe. And so those things, I think, would need to be made clear if they have not been already. To that, I can't say for certain what the IUB Utilities Board has said, but that would be a restriction on the use of the pipe. I know you asked Mr. Reinig earlier, the diameter of the pipe that would be going through this. At this point, I cannot recall. I can't remember if it's 4-inch, 8-inch, or 12-inch pipe, and I can't remember what the Carbon Summit individual informed me of. But I did ask that it be planted deeper. That has been another issue. So that's what I have down in my notes. Is there anything else I can answer for you?
Oh, I'm sure we'll have more questions.
Yeah.
Do you recommend an alternative route for the proposed line, should it be necessary? And can you describe that route and its theoretical advantages and disadvantages?
I already know that's beyond my scope. I do not know if there's a better route. As I discussed earlier, and if you pull your map down further, so pull it from top to bottom so we can see 141 in the housing. I don't know where else you go along there. I really don't believe the pipeline can go up Avenue N or 230 Avenue, which if you move the screen from further to the west, you see where off 141 south, that road. I was told, I just spoke to Regional Water again today to verify, but they said it runs anywhere from 100 to 150 feet. The tap runs down that road. And I don't know if that was to avoid the farmstead, but there's another farm in section 8, 3/4, that run east to west. If you pull the map up, I'm sorry, the other direction. You keep going. Okay, you see the road, next road that runs east-west, that's Avenue N. Okay, and March Hemminger Trust, starting off 230 on N, owns 340s that run east-west. And so we actually, where the pipeline is over on the right side, it does not run across that portion of the farm, that farm that March Hemminger Trust has. It actually runs further east. So you can see where it crosses, the line for the proposed pipeline crosses Avenue N. To your right, there we go. See where the green ends? And as you move to the west, where that green ends, right there, that's the property line for March Hemminger Trust. So I can't say, it's beyond my scope of knowledge as to if that's a better place to run the land. But those are what I understand the obstacles are, as I discussed previously, about rural water on 141, about the building on the east side of, so right with your arrow, keep going right some more, there you go. Right there, there's going to be somebody's going to build a house right there, is what I was told. So I don't know if there's any other way for them to go.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have for right now. We'll now turn to the parties. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Mr. Hemminger, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. And first of all, that farm ground in the upper northeast corner, how many acres is that? Just the farm ground?
4 or 5, probably.
Okay. What do you grow there?
This year it's corn. It's a corn bean rotation.
Okay.
And then we're also looking at doing carbon sequestration after the crops come in.
Carbon sequestration, how?
Planting of rye. It's something new. I'm not totally understanding how we do it, but we're trying to improve the quality of the farmland at all times.
So there are ways to pardon, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was not.
Okay.
Sorry.
So there are ways to capture carbon other than out of an ethanol plant and putting it in a pipeline, right?
I believe so.
So you want to build some wooded lots in all of that wooded section, is that right?
Yes, we're looking at planting it, and there's been debate between 2 and 5 acre lots.
Okay. And I think what the board was getting at, and just to clarify, they want to know whether there really is a plan to develop that area into lots, or if it's just some kind of hypothetical speculation or dream.
No, it's been a plan since my mom inherited the property, at least her portion of it. And within all the steps that have been taken since that time, have been incremental, but we're not sophisticated enough. We learn as we go. And then we've had a lot of interest from other parties to put in, this lot, these land lots, because it's on 141. It's on a hard surface road. And apparently everybody wants that. There's also nice views of Denison up at the top of the hill. And so when we went to court to split the undivided interest that was held between my mom and my aunt, and then ultimately by the trust. That's what I planned that. I'm sorry, sir?
That's what lawyers call partition action. So you divided the property into 2, so so it had separate owners. Is that correct?
Correct.
What is that big brown area southwest of your property?
Okay, so if you can move the map further to the west so I can get an idea, I believe that that's just when they shot the satellite image, I believe somebody had just done tillage work there
That's what I wondered. Yeah,
Okay.
I figured.
But I don't think, I don't know if you can expand the map on the west side and get in more detail, whether or not narrow it down further, whether or not you can see the fence. I mean, I went through a lot of headache. Yes, you can see the fence up there. So if you go further north and then blow it up, you can see the line where the fence is. Continue north.
Right.
Just go a little further north, please. I'm trying to tell if that's before or after the fence was added. I can't.
Okay.
Because that entrance that is exhibited on the left side, that's into the property itself. So if where your arrow is pointed 1 inch to the left, off of, and then down to your right, that's the entrance, I believe, right there.
Right. It looks like it, yeah.
And so we had planned to put a building right off of that to house the equipment to maintain the property. And all along there, there's a fence that runs at a different angle, but to provide for a road that would encompass the whole property. So you could drive around the whole property and then gain access along those fingers where you put the houses. And then where those houses are, because of the steepness of the incline of the trees, then you would have, nice wooded area in the background, in the backyard of your home.
Is that plowed owned by the trust?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Taylor, we had some feedback there. Can you repeat that question for us?
Sure. Is that large brown area that's been plowed, is that owned by the trust?
Given this map, I'm unable to answer that question specifically. If you're talking, I see that there's a brown area in the right-hand side where the pipeline runs.
Yeah.
My guess is that is 140. That's, since there's 3 parcels along there, that's the parcel, the 40-acre parcel that they're highlighting in a different color, if that makes sense. Because all land is delineated in 40-acre parcels.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. That stream that runs between the farmland and the wooded area, the pipeline would have to cross that, correct?
It does, yes. And they told me that they would make it extra deep, and then they have experience crossing those types of water embankments. My concern was how that would affect, how if over time there'd be subsidence or a cutting away. I have seen that on other farms in the past.
But did Summit tell you that they would have to take out a lot of trees in order to install the pipeline, and then that their permanent easement could not have any trees on it?
Correct.
Is that a concern?
It is, yes, because where the pipeline is, there's an easement on each, so many feet on each side of that pipeline. But from where the pipeline runs north-south over to the fence row on the wooded area, they want to take all those trees out and use that as a temporary easement, but it would be cleared. And they said we could put trees back in, but then the problem with that is you don't have, it's not in the Forest Reserve program anymore. There's not enough acres with a requisite number of trees. So you're going to be paying on it, and if you're in the interim trying to farm it, it may not qualify because of the steepness under sodbuster or with the mitigation measures that would be required by the NRCS.
Does it concern you that the area of dispersion, if there's a pipeline rupture or leak, might be as much as 3,000 feet?
Yes, absolutely it does. Especially if people are, if we're in the process of developing the area. Just reading the horror stories about Mississippi, and then there was another article I read about in India where they had a carbon pipeline that ruptured, and thousands of people did not fare well in that incident. So, yes, that's a very big concern, and thank you, sir, for its dispersion. Isn't that the report that they're trying to hold up? Dispersion?
Yes. And you said that just to the east of your farm ground, the neighbor wanted to build a house?
That's what Carbon Summit represented to me. Right where you had you see there's some trees along there. Right. And it looked like there used to be a physical structure, but somebody was looking to build on the east side of that fence row. To who that is, I have no idea.
Yeah. And is there a house or the building's right north of 141?
Correct. Yeah, it's an A-frame house located, as you can see where the proposed pipeline is, directly to the west. And it has a pond there, and that's where rural water informed me that that's as far as they come with rural water. So that's the last house on the line. Yeah. And that runs from the west. And that's why I think that Carbon Summit had to choose a place, to cross 141. And that's why it's their ideal location, apparently.
If there were a pipeline rupture, where is the closest place that the response personnel would come from?
Well, that's it's kind of interesting. They moved the hospital in Denison, Iowa, for Crawford County. If we go back to that avenue end where the other farm is located, you move down, and then there's Avenue N, and you go to the east on Avenue N, probably a mile and a half. That big complex that you see right there, yep, that's the Crawford County Hospital. Oh. So I guess it's a positive thing that it's on our side of town now, but that's also driving a lot of the doctors and personnel to find places to live over on that side of Denison.
In other words, they might be prime suspects to buy a house in your development.
Right. And one of the things that has come up in the past, and I can't speak to it, I don't think I was even alive at the time, but there has been, it's on this side, the west side of the river that runs through town. And so if the river floods, now, that was one of the concerns when my grandparents were in the nursing home located on the east side of Denison. The hospital was right there. That's why they put the nursing home right beside it, and the assisted living facilities. And then, in my absence, as I went away and taught elsewhere in the country and in the world, they moved the hospital over on the west side of the river. And so now people are worried that in the event of a flood, they wouldn't be able to get to work. Again, raising the value of a housing addition where we're at.
you mentioned a little bit about discussions you've had with the Summit representatives. Can you give us some more detail about the contacts and discussions you've had with Summit land agents or other representatives of Summit?
Why, I've met most, the individuals I've met the most were a female who has since retired, and then the male. And again, this is the first time I've ever used Zoom. I'm afraid to peel away to be able to give you or provide their name from the email address. But they've been, I would say, receptive in terms of my concerns. I did ask to be notified and did not give permission to come onto the property without my telling me ahead of time, and then that I wanted to be there. So they did permit me to show up before they went on and did their cultural evaluation of the property. I can tell you that my grandfather, one of his big things as a kid was to find Indian arrowheads, etc., on the property. It passed that inspection. They took me out in a 4x4 and up into that area and showed me what it would look like. I hadn't been up there in many years, as I've been gone about 30 from the area. And I guess the biggest thing that we have is the failure to meet at a reasonable accommodation as to full remuneration on what the easement's worth. But at the same time, I have been asking, for more substantiating materials as to the efficacy and then the safety of the pipeline due to the developmental stance that we're at on the rest of the farm. So Carbon Summit has been, I think, middling. I mean, good and bad, but I can't say that they've been terrible to us, and at the same time, I can't say that every request has gone answered.
That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Ms. Colas?
There I am. Good afternoon, Mr. Williamson. I had a few questions. Now, earlier in your testimony, you indicated you were concerned about the release deficiency. They hadn't released the defining report. They were very reluctant. Were you relating to the dispersion model?
Yes, I believe that's correct. As Mr. Wally brought up with the Sierra Club, I think it's the dispersion report that they hadn't done one in Mississippi or didn't release it. And so after the Capital Dispatch article, I wanted to, and I read about it, and I would like to see that, and I'm a little frustrated that it's been sequestered by the courts and not released to the public.
When you were talking with Summit representatives, did they indicate or give you any idea or hazard or risk analysis of a CO2 pipeline on your land?
My question regarding that was the size of the pipe, and then that I'd read that the pipes, once they're in place, they can be altered for what type of use. And I have known friends in South Dakota that have dealt with pipelines that deal with crude oil, and that's absolutely something that the beneficiaries are not interested in. And so I was, and I believe it's in, I don't know if it's worded correctly because we have, it's expensive to send each easement derivative that they send, or each modification, or each amended easement that they're suggesting, when I bring up issues to the attorney to have it, to get a legal determination. So I was told that they would not run anything through, and if they said they put in the easement, that if they did, then we would renegotiate. But I guess that's as responsive as I can be to your general question. If you have a more specific one, I'll try and answer it better.
Well, that's pretty good. I have a question. Is the topography, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Does the topography of your land create a concern about possibly having a rupture on your property or close to your property?
Yes, there is, just because of the experience that we've had with natural gas pipelines, with my gas trust in South Dakota. It's, there's subsidence that takes place, and the hilliness of this land does create a concern. And I don't know, I can't speak to the fact. I did hear Mr. Reinig earlier speaking about the long-term types of accommodations, and from the easement, I don't recall there being, they say they will do maintenance, but they don't say, I don't believe they address that in 20 years or 40 years or 80. And the one that I'm dealing with on my dad's trust, that was put in 100 years ago. Well, now, there's been so much subsidence and they moved out, that is a big concern that was never addressed in the easement. So at this time, I can't say if that has been adequately covered. I just have to take it on the representations made by the Carbon Summit employees as to the fact that they will in the future maintain the pipeline.
Okay. Is the EMS response team that goes to the hospital, is that through the fire department, the hospital, or volunteer?
I have been gone for 30 years. I do not know what's going on in Crawford County at this moment. I live one county south in Shelby County, and I can tell you that we just lost the Harlan Police Department, was absorbed into the Shelby County. And at this time in Shelby County, we're looking at trying to establish, it's a private party, EMS, and they're trying to, I know Mayor Gene Geddes is working on some kind of plan to create an EMS in Shelby County. All I know from Denison, when I speak to the abstractors and attorneys up there, is that they're working on a similar type of plan. Because I guess Harlan's done it, Logan, Iowa's done it, in Harrison County, and Denison was looking at doing away with their city police department. But I do not know how that affects all those other areas. You'd have to find somebody that lives there to be more fully informed.
You mentioned that there were several groups or areas that were trying to plan or coordinate a response to a rupture. Do you know if Summit has provided them with adequate training or is willing to provide equipment or information to them so they could go forward with these programs?
I cannot say from personal experience. I have friends that are on the Harlan fire department, volunteer fire department, and they have mentioned in the past that other departments have received training, but I cannot speak to the fact that either Shelby County, Harlan and Shelby County, or anyone in Denison has received that training. It's beyond my scope.
But you don't know if Summit to your area has provided hazard training or has informed them as to what the hazard is, like for plume modeling and that kind of thing, of what they're dealing with.
But I'm very interested, but I do not know.
Were you aware that PHMSA, the federal agency governing the safety of pipelines and that with the modifications, that since the Sartasia eruption have decided to reevaluate the guidelines and safety features necessary for a CO2 pipeline rupture because the ones for Sartasia were not adequate?
No. And what's you're saying the name? Sartasia? I don't know how to spell it.
Sartasia, I believe, Mississippi.
Okay, Mississippi. Okay. No, I did not know that.
And the agency, I don't have exactly, but it's basically PHMSA is the agency that's reevaluating this. And I don't believe the findings will be out until sometime next year. And I brought that up because you were concerned about the rush before all the information is out or the evaluation has been done on building this pipeline.
Absolutely. And one thing that I do want to say, in the many different jurisdictions in which I've lived, different states and countries, but Iowa is unique in that, and that's what I always enjoyed when I was a youngster growing up learning about the government and law in the state of Iowa, is that many of the committees at the state level require both members from each political party as well as independent members. And that way you have a cross-section or representation. And from what I've been able to gather after reading about what's going on with this pipeline is that it's been potentially hijacked. And that's why it's been moved up and why I feel that it's currently being rushed upon us. And I object to that. You know, I think that we have a right to all the information possible to make the best possible decision, and that is being curtailed, and therefore, again, my request, and I believe I do not stand alone, that this be set off. And again, eminent domain, they shouldn't. It's a private company, and they're using a public option to take away the rights of the landowners. So I think we need some more time to flesh that out. And I actually was quite surprised, and at the beginning of the year had held out hope that the legislature was going to pass the provision that 80 or 90% of the land easements had to be granted prior to eminent domain even being considered. So I'm with you. I would like additional time.
Pardon?
I'm with you. I would like additional time to review what's going on and to be fully informed. So thank you for asking the question and permitting me to respond.
Thank you very much. You've answered my questions very fully. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ryan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Anna Ryan, and I'm an attorney for Carrie Hurth in this proceeding. She's the daughter of a landowner. I just want to follow up on that very last discussion you were just having. You indicated that you would like to have more time because, you know, What are some of the issues that you would look into if you had more time?
Well, number one, the dispersion. Well, how does that affect people living there? Not only are we looking at potentially, as those of us age out, hopefully well, and have long lives like our grandparents and parents, some of the beneficiaries were looking at wanting to live on this property and to establish homes. And that is a concern because we don't know. I admittedly, I didn't go to, I took science in college, but I didn't go for a science degree. I don't really understand how this stuff moves and what the ramifications are, or should there be a negative outcome along the pipeline. The one story that I read is that people tried to get away from it, and they were unable to because their vehicles wouldn't drive because all the oxygen was used up by the carbon dioxide. And so I have to learn more, and through these hearings, I have learned more as people have testified, but that's what the additional time's for.
Would it have been helpful to you if Summit's witnesses had testified first before you?
To be honest, yes and no. Yes, that would be ideal. And no, all this new technology is something that's beyond my scope of understanding. This is my first time ever on Zoom. So I'm getting the hang of it. But I can tell you that utilizing the courts to minimize the release of information, to me, is bad faith on behalf of Summit, and something that I don't look highly upon.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions from the parties, Mr. Hemminger, thank you. You are excused.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
All right, the board will call our final witness for the day, Douglas Phillips, to testify on parcel H-DI-042.